stars, but it also had an interesting application in that I would put them to bed, and then they would turn the light on and read. And so in order to make sure that their bedtime was obeyed, these stars served a second purpose, because they'd hear me coming down the stairs and they'd quickly turn the light off, but the stars would be glowing, so I knew exactly what they were doing. In fact, I could look at how bright those stars were and figure out how much time had been traversed since they turned the light off. Well, that's basically thermoluminescence dating. However, it's why this only gives you an upper limit is that you're assuming full illumination. You know, what if you have a lower wattage light? Then you're not going to get the same date as you would if it was fully illuminated. So whenever you read in the literature that they have a thermoluminescence date for some kind of bipedal primate species, and by the way, the vast majority of the dates that are out there are thermoluminescence dates. So when you read the scientific literature and it talks about we have a date of 3 million years for this Australopithecine, read it carefully. If it's a thermoluminescence date, that's an upper limit. It's 3 million years or less. And this is part of the chaos that is a problem in looking at bipedal primate evolution.
And the carbon-14 method is more precise and informative.
Pardon me?
The carbon-14 method.
Yes, it is, but rarely do we have carbon-14. And carbon-14 is only reliable back to about 40,000 years. The half-life of carbon-14 is 5,715 years. And typically with radiometric dating, if you're a factor of 6 removed from the half-life, the method is useless. So carbon-14 is going to be of no value for dating Neanderthals. But it is of value for dating, say, the Aborigines. And in this disputed case, where they had this date of 60,000 years, about a year and a half ago, they found some carbon remains at the site. And they were able to date that through carbon-14. The date came in at 3,000 years ago. So this is an example where the thermoluminescent date was off by a factor of 20 times. And with the Aborigines dating 3,000 years ago, we have no problem with our calibrated date out of Genesis chapter 11. Now, I do believe there are legitimate dates for the Aborigines that come in at 30,000 years ago. But 30,000 would be consistent with a rapid migration after the flood. And that's something we see in Genesis 11, is that there was this forced rapid migration after the flood. In fact, my colleague Fuzz Rana has just posted a discovery on our Reasons.org website, a paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that documents that the coastlines of southern Asia and the coastlines of western North and South America facilitated an extremely rapid migration. Now, I grew up in coastal British Columbia, and this paper is right on the target in the sense that on the coast of British Columbia, it's real easy to live. You've got abundant shellfish you can just pull right off the beach. It's easy to fish. There are berries all along the shore. It's easy to walk along the shore. It would be no trouble at all to migrate several hundred miles per month. And indeed, the archaeological evidence shows us that humans reached the southern tip of South America in less than 1,000 years after they crossed the Bering Land Bridge. And likewise, along the south shore of Asia, there would be that same facility. The shorelines are the places where life is easiest to live and it's easiest to make rapid movement. It's hard to go through a thick forest. It's not that hard to walk along a beach. So all this is really quite consistent once we recognize that these thermoluminescence dates are upper limits. Now, in terms of other archaeological finds, we have what are called the Big Bangs of anthropology. It's not just astronomers that have the Big Bang theory. Anthropologists have their own Big Bang theory. And one of the more remarkable Big Bangs is what they call the jewelry Big Bang. You know, what's different about human beings compared to all the other bipedal primates? We're the only ones that wear jewelry. With the Neanderthals, we have zero evidence for jewelry. Homo sapiens ideltu, zero evidence for jewelry. This forest man that they recently found in Indonesia, no jewelry. Homo erectus, no jewelry. But when human beings show up on the scene, jewelry immediately appears. And incidentally, the jewelry is about 10 times as abundant as the tools are. We do see Neanderthals using primitive tools. When humans come on the scene, there's a lot more tools, and the tools are much more sophisticated. But interestingly, the jewelry always outweighs the tools. And I think that's true in households today, that your typical household has more jewelry in it than it has tools. But it's a sudden eruption. It's not an evolution. And as you look at primitive humans from, say, 40,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago, the jewelry use is relatively constant. And the degree of sophistication is also relatively constant. In terms of language, we see this sudden eruption of language with the human species. And they say, how can you tell whether there's language going on? Well, there's certain cultural things that you would recognize could only be there if the people were communicating at a high level of linguistic complexity and a large level of vocabulary. And this suddenly shows up on the scene 40,000 years ago. And, to the effect that we're the only species that has vocabulary sizes that number in the tens of thousands of words, and we're the only species that spends 25,000 words plus per individual per day. Now, you do have certain gorilla individuals that have been trained to get a vocabulary of 300 words. Likewise, there are parrots that have vocabularies of a similar size. But they lack grammatical complexity. You don't see the verb, subject, object form like you do in our language. Moreover, those individual animals only gain that vocabulary size by spending 20 years plus with an individual that's literally working with that creature every single day to build up that vocabulary. And if something happens to the human being, the vocabulary quickly disappears. So it's simply a mark of how these creatures have been designed by God to enjoy a relationship with human beings. My wife says that I have a cat that's actually developing quite a high vocabulary. But as far as I can tell, that cat has only developed one grammatical form, namely the command tense. So, clothing, Big Bang. Human beings are the only species that wears clothes. I'm not talking about these dogs. They're forced to wear clothes. But humans are the only ones that willingly wear clothes. Neanderthals, zero evidence of clothing use. Likewise with the bipedal primates. And the thing we notice with humans, they don't wear a small amount of clothes. There's lots of clothes. Even in the most ancient human finds, you realize they've got more than one change of clothing. So it's not just kind of the loincloth image you see in the comic strips. These were creatures that actually invested heavily in developing a lot of clothing. And then the toolkit. What we notice is that lots of species use tools. Chimpanzees use tools. Porpoises and dolphins use tools. Certain birds use tools. And likewise, Neanderthals use tools. Now, the Neanderthals' tool use was a little more sophisticated than what we see with chimpanzees today. But it was basically exploitation of what was already there. The most sophisticated we see in non-human species is where a creature would pick up a rock, a hammer rock, and smash it against another rock, and it would splinter, and it would basically use the pieces that came from that. That's the most sophisticated you see. When human beings come upon the scene, they begin to manufacture tools that they can use to manufacture tools. And they begin to put things together, like they have a wooden handle they'll put together with an axe head and actually connect it together. And you notice that the sophistication of tools grows as the society matures. This is unique to humanity. And so there's this advanced toolkit, but again, it suddenly shows up on the scene 40,000 years ago. Advanced art shows up on the scene 33,000 years ago. And once again, you've got to be careful with this. Some non-Christian anthropologists will point to other creatures that engage in art. But it's a kind of art that would only be put on display in a modern museum of art. I mean, you can get an elephant to swing a bucket of paint and put something on a canvas. Likewise, you can get chimpanzees doing that. But we notice in the certain caves in France dating 33,000 years ago, is you'll see murals